Hi, everyone. This is Rich Berliner. I'm here with our esteemed panelists for our next panel, How to Choose, Manage, and Optimize Your Communications Program and Partners. I'm here, interestingly enough, with one of my oldest friends in the business and some of my newest friends in the business. So it's a really um, interesting panel for me to have this group together. So thank you all for being with us. So let's start with the introductions today. Dick, why don't you start with, give us an introduction to you and to SpotOn. You're muted. You're muted. There you go.
My name is Dick Sherwin, and I am the older friend of Berliner. I'm with SpotOn Networks. We provide three basic wireless services to multi-tenant buildings: a truly managed Wi-Fi service, a passive distributed antenna system service called Cell Boost, and a emergency responder radio enhancement system called Radio Boost.
Gotcha. Jeff, you're up.
Hi, Jeff Hipchen, Executive Vice President with RF Connect. I probably fall somewhere in between Dick and some of your other relationships, but I'm happy to be a part of the panel. RF Connect is a provider of fixed and mobile wireless solutions across the nation, both as an integrator and operator.
Thank you. Next, let's go to Barby. Barby, you're up.
And I am probably the new kid on the block, if I had to guess, but I am Barby Biggs. I'm the Northeast Regional CTO for ConvergeOne. ConvergeOne is a systems integrator and a managed service provider. We're approaching roughly $2 billion in revenue. We design, implement, and maintain systems across the entire IT portfolio stack, and currently we work with about 67% of the Fortune 100.
Good. Greg?
Yeah, hi, my name is Greg Jones. I'm the president of Montgomery Technologies. Montgomery Technologies is a national riser management and strategic consulting, working with building owners, property managers, and industry leaders to try and help solve building network challenges, whether it's cellular, telecom, base building systems. We sort of handle all things when it comes to in-building wired and wireless systems.
Gotcha. So before we kick this off, I do want to mention that we did a panel earlier today called Embracing CBRS and 5G. And Jeff's company, RF Connect, was the sponsor. RF Connect brought to you by Annixter. And we did have it on the screen. And Aaron, I think, mentioned it at the end of the panel, but I didn't when I was doing the panel itself. So Jeff, I want to thank you for that and give you recognition, give you props for being the sponsor of that in conjunction with Annixter. So thank you. So Dick, let's kick this off with you. How does one go about finding out what owners, managers, and tenants want when they may not know themselves? How do you figure out what to give them if they don't know?
That's a really good question, Rich. The fact is, we've been in the situation where we find ourselves witnessing that the owner doesn't really know exactly what he wants. So our approach is to ask a series of questions about what the building is meant to do, what its purpose and raison d'etre in life is. And so we look at a whole range of things, but we basically ask, is there voice service in the building? Can you use a smartphone in the building? Is it a LEED certified building with low emissivity windows and concrete structure, things like that? Is there a need to provide the occupiers of the building? I use the word occupiers, it's tenants, employees, residents, whatever, depending upon the type of building. Is there a need to provide high-speed services, wired or wireless, streaming services, things like that, especially in light of the pandemic situation that we're in right now, as we see more and more people work from home and we see more and more kids learning from home. So we look at that and we try to ask a whole series of questions about what the nature of the desires of the building owner are. And we look at, how do we future-proof this building? how do we make it so that the building can provide the kind of connectivity that we're projecting for the next 10, 15 years? One of the things we look at is, maybe we need fiber risers because it's a high rise, and we need copper Cat 6 as an example to individual locations for access points so that there's power over Ethernet. Those are some of the things that we look at, and I think a range of questions is critical to trying to determine what the owner developer really needs.
So back when I was a young executive, Dick, I was asked by somebody to what the classic definition of marketing was. So, go to Webster's dictionary back in that day, rather than dictionary.com. The answer to the question was finding out what people want and giving it to them. So this sounds like a classic marketing issue, that it's impossible to sell somebody something until you know what they want and know what they need. So that fits together with what you're saying here. So besides the questioning part of it, how do you shake out what someone in a building needs? In other words, do you use your experience in what you've done before for other people? And, as they tell you they want this, this, and this, and they leave off a whole series of things, you go back and say, well, in other buildings, we've also given them IoT, we've also given them this, we've also given them that. How do you put that together in your head?
I guess the best way for me to answer that is it goes to experience, and it goes to a lot of research. We do a lot of research on what's available in a building in today's environment. We see people like John Gilbert putting in Nantum and things like that. We watch those issues very carefully. We see what people are doing in residential, and we try to project what that developer owner will need and ask him specifically, look, this is what people have done. Is this something that you would like to entertain?
Yeah, good. So, Jeff, let's go to you next. So once you've done your homework and you now know what the basics of what the customer wants, how do you go about helping them get there? How do you create a plan? How do you craft a presentation? So, what's the process from your standpoint to go to the next level after what Dick's talked about? You're muted.
Yep, sorry about that. To follow up with what Dick mentioned, you start with a lot of questions. You gotta be the ears and ask them questions about what their business cases are, both now, near, and the future, and then what technologies they have planned now, near, in the future, and try to align that up with what the business cases are to figure out what, based on, as Dick mentioned also, industry experience. That's when we bring our engineers in to sit down with the technical people and align what help the customer decide what is the best fit by aligning the questions with some of the technologies to make sure that, because every situation, business case, every building is unique. They're kind of like snowflakes. Everyone's unique. And so you need to not come in with a patented, predetermined solution ahead of time, but come in, listen, align with, based on experience, what the technologies are that can help them achieve their business goals.
And so what is it that your firm does from sort of, a cradle to grave situation? Or are you involved in every aspect of what they might need? And how do you kind of, pull in the right resources to figure all that out?
Yeah, so based on what we find out in our discovery mode from them, again, we have resources within our team that we come in, and what we try to do is help our customers by positioning. We are focused on connectivity, but to be fair with that, we're agnostic with the technologies, but in particular, our focus tends to be more on the wireless side, whether it be fixed or mobile wireless. But with that, we act as a trusted advisor to help them through the decision process. And that way they can stay focused on not learning what all the latest technologies are and staying up with all the standards, just help them understand enough to be dangerous so that they can make decisions, but act as their trusted advisor to help them through the various series of what technologies, the pros and cons, and what that will do for them, and help them come to a conclusion as to what approach will be the best.
Right. And so if you have, sort of a design team, you have an installation team, you have a team to figure out what the right technology is, as being, you said you're technology agnostic. You've got to figure that part of it out. Then you got to figure out, the logistics of it. So if you're pulling in internal people, or in some cases, I would assume there have to be external people, if, where you're ordering the materials to, Annixter, for instance. So how does that process work in terms of, getting everybody together, sitting them down, telling them what the customer said, figuring out what all the bits and pieces are? How does that work?
A lot of meetings, and with the that's where this year for all of us has been interesting. It's changed the game a little bit. So most of those meetings, unfortunately, have taken place via calls like this, using video and so forth. But getting the parties together to come up with a plan to start with, milestones, and then often it leads to breaking it in the discovery mode, breaking it into subgroups. And having the subgroups take apart with establish their goals and take action on that. And then a regular, say monthly, or if needed, more frequent meeting where you bring the whole group together to report back as to progress and, goals and milestones and status.
Are you finding that a challenge in a virtual world?
More of a challenge, because, as I think we've all experienced, is thank goodness with the technology we have today, we're able to do as much as we can, but there's still something lost with not having that face-to-face interaction, for sure.
Gotcha. So Barbie, let's go to you. You're muted, by the way. So your firm probably does a wider range of things than any of the other folks on the panel. It's a larger company and does more different things. So what are the considerations? What elements are necessary to take into account to make a sound vendor choice? And what are the considerations? How does one come to you and amongst all the different things you're doing and work with you on those skills?
That's a great question, Rich. And I'm going to kind of tie in a little bit of what both Dick and Jeff said. So one of the key components that I think that everyone has to look at, or two key components, is experience and the portfolio offering. You want to make sure that when you bring in a vendor that they have the experience specifically in the environment that you're looking for, whether that's, new construction or new tenant space or retrofit. Are you taking an existing building and adding smart building capabilities? You need to make sure that those vendors and those partners have experience in those areas. It's difficult sometimes when you look at the wide array of manufacturers and portfolios out there to pick not only the most exciting technology that may address your needs, but to pick that technology from a partner who can actually design it and implement it and make it happen. So experience being one, and I would also say the portfolio of offerings. Or, are you looking at a company that maybe does just one item that you need, where a better fit might be a company that can do multiple things across the same portfolio? So kind of taking those and tying them in to see who is the best player in that space that meets your need to move forward. I also think you have to consider the methodology, which I'm not sure if it was Dick or Jeff that talked to being able to go in and work on an approach with the customer that basically takes them from the beginning of that assessment stage and moves into validation of what they need and the actual design and deliverables behind it. So I think that those are some very key components of what to look for and how to start choosing those vendors or integrators to work with.
Interesting. So I guess the question is then, how do you look at bringing in teams? Because now you've got thousands of people rather than hundreds or dozens of people. So, are we bringing Joe in? Are we bringing Tom in? Are we bringing an outside vendor in? Are we bringing this group in? Or who's got time? How does that work? How do you manage that in a big company setting? I've never worked in that way. How do you manage that?
Well, I think it always starts with a good core team to the business, whether those are the account managers or the solutions architects that are involved, who actually have to take that assessment and turn it into something real, who has to look at each piece of technology that's needed and find either internally the resource to best address that or externally with a third partner to help tie it in. So it really is a long process in a lot of cases. I know to Jeff's point, it's a lot and a lot of meetings, but it really is having that key team focused on the end result and letting them make the decisions and help guide your customer as to where their end vision is and how best to address it with your entire portfolio of partner networks.
Right. But what about internally? Is it, back in the day when I ran a construction company, a lot of times it was, who's available? So-and-so is deep into a project, so we can't pull him off. But, this person is available and they can be used for this. How does that work in a big company like this where is there a bench that you go and pull people from, or is it done in a more esoteric sort of way?
I wouldn't necessarily call it a bench. I think from a ConvergeOne perspective, we do really well with program management. So having someone in charge of the project who understands that you need a resource who is going to do, wireless network design and finding the best available resource for that. So we actually have scheduling within each of our departments. So it's matching up the correct engineer who's available at the time, whether that's an engineer who's local to the area, or since we're a nationwide company, we can reach into other areas. So in a large construction project in New Jersey, we had people come in that worked on that, and they came in from California and Georgia and Kansas and many, many states to make sure that we had the resources available to address the needs that we had. So it is a lot of scheduling, Rich, but it's finding the company that has the depth to be able to provide that and coordinate it. And great project or program management.
Gotcha. Good. So let's move on to you, Greg. Greg, your firm is primarily working for the landlord or the owner of the building, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, you do a lot of work with the risers in the buildings and with that group, that batch of spaghetti that's in all those closets. How does that fit together with choosing a wireless vendor? And what's the connection there? Is there any relevance, or do they have nothing to do with each other or everything to do with each other?
Well, I think one of the things that we all sort of need to recognize is that buildings have layers and layers of technology that are already deployed, that are in the buildings. And in many cases, many building owners don't really know what they have. So a riser management program is a good way to kind of get your arms around what's there and what exists. And oftentimes we can find that, we do not need to run another 12 strand single mode fiber from the top of the building to the bottom of the building, because we already have that infrastructure in place. So part of that is understanding a little bit about what you have. But when it comes to wireless, I think the biggest challenge for most folks is really there's just so many choices and so many options. They really don't understand the why. Why do I need to do this? And I think for us, with a lot of our clients, the fundamental question comes down to, well, who's going to own this infrastructure? Who's going to pay for it? And who's going to manage it moving forward? Because as a building owner, the last thing I need to do is take on another technology challenge that I have to operate and manage so it makes my tenants happy. That's a big challenge. So finding good partners that can own, manage, and operate these systems is really what a lot of landlords are looking for, because the last thing they need is yet another technology in their building that they have to deploy, manage, train around, and all of the challenges that come with it, particularly when we're talking about wireless, where what we need today, which, some would say is, 4G for cellular, and what we need tomorrow, and whether that's 5G or CBRS or whatever the next iteration is a very difficult choice. And making the wrong choice can be very expensive. And I think partnering with firms that own these systems or operate them or have experience across the board is really where landlords are looking for some support and trying to figure out, why do we need to do this, and making good decisions around infrastructure investment so it's not simply for one solution, but has the potential to support other building systems. And that's really where we see a lot of our work, is sort of helping them make good decisions that have a long-term benefit for lots of systems in their buildings.
So it sounds like what you're saying is an expansion of what Dick was talking about at the beginning, is besides a needs analysis, you've got to look at an asset analysis. And wait a second, I got to go down the checklist here. Yeah, I got a bunch of spaghetti that the Verizon and, Bell Atlantic and, Thomas Edison left in this closet. But so beyond that, now I've got to look and I've got to give them an understanding of, hey, you've already got this, or you thought you had this, or you don't. How does that work in the way you guys approach the market?
Well, a lot of times, what it comes down to is, understanding the why. What are we trying to do? Are we trying to solve for, neutral host DAS in a commercial office building? Well, that's a very challenging space right now, and particularly in multi-tenant, because who owns, pays for it, and operates it is a real big challenge. So, but we do know that things like Wi-Fi and IoT and a number of building systems are all moving in the direction of needing network connectivity. So a lot of our work has been around, what do we need today? And today we need robust, secure Wi-Fi for building systems, building operating systems. And more we're seeing building owners take information from their buildings and put it out to the cloud. So these are some technologies that are being deployed everywhere across the country and are going to continue to grow as we see smart building solutions become sort of the standard for our industry.
Gotcha. So Dick, back around to you. Greg made a good point about looking at these different technologies, and if you're setting up for one thing or another. You and I have talked before, and I know you've got some interesting thoughts on this of, Wi-Fi 6 versus CBRS versus other things. And, my initial decision making in this panel wasn't necessarily to try and tear those apart and figure all that out. But I think it's really kind of important when we're looking at this now to sort of get everybody's thoughts on, there are differences, there are similarities, there are benefits, there are downsides. Talk us through a little bit of the technology in terms of what you and I have discussed before about, Wi-Fi 6 versus CBRS and the pathway to 5G on that. Can you enlighten us a bit?
Sure. First of all, I think Greg was, you'll pardon the pun, spot on. And the reason I say that is he has basically laid out what I think is the right program for a building owner to look at what's there now, to try to make a determination of the needs for the next X years, and then to consider the various technologies. And I guess Jeff and Barbie both hinted at the same thing. One of the things, Rich, that you and I have talked about is what are the differences between Wi-Fi 6 and CBRS and 5G and all this other stuff. So let me just, I think each service is oriented toward a specific set of use cases. No one has a monopoly on everything that needs to be done. We've put wireless services in more than 1,000 buildings over the course of the last 10 years. And each time we put a wireless service in a building, we sometimes learn something new about what needs to be done. So let me take a step back. I consider that there are 3 or 4 basic categories of service that answer the needs of building owners. A truly managed Wi-Fi service, especially in a mixed use or multifamily residential, is an interesting service. And the reason is it provides seamless Wi-Fi calling throughout the community. And many of these LEED certified buildings prevent cellular service in the building. The resident finds out he has no cell service, he can't use his smartphone, and he goes ballistic on the owner. A Wi-Fi calling service does the job very nicely for those locations where you have a permanent base of users, like a multifamily residential. A either a distributed antenna system, which is much more expensive, or a CBRS type neutral host in a commercial environment is probably a good solution, because you don't have the basic constant use people in the building. You have a lot of people who are randomly coming into the building and then leaving the building. And so there's a need to have an automatic capability of providing smartphone service in the building without the user having to do anything. But that leads to my next point. You had a speaker on earlier this morning on the Embracing CBRS and 5G, Derek Peterson, a friend of mine. And Derek is the one who is leading the WBA effort in automated roaming, including Google's Orion Wi-Fi, in which smartphone users coming into a building with a Hotspot 2.0 up-to-date technology Wi-Fi service will not have to do anything. It'll be automatic. And here's the key point. If you're in a building where users use a great deal of capacity, a great deal of bandwidth, a great deal of frequency, then one of the things you have to know is that Wi-Fi 6 offers 1.6 gigahertz of spectrum in a building, every building. CBRS, the GAA side, only offers about 70 megahertz of spectrum, and your typical distributed antenna system is anywhere between 100 and 150 megahertz of spectrum. So those are the things that have to be considered when you're selecting technology. We know, and this is where I think Greg was spot on, we know that the building owner doesn't want to manage the service. And so the service provider who manages the service takes on the responsibility of doing that, handles the 24/7 customer service function, and takes that load off the building owner. And we think that's the niche that we address. And the other thing to point out is if you as a building owner are selecting a technology to do Internet of Things, monitoring the air, monitoring water, monitoring temperature, monitoring humidity, you may have to find a way to deal with other protocols like Zigbee and Z-Wave. And so they have to be incorporated in whatever solution that service provider is going to select.
Right. So Jeff, there was a lot there, and Dick and I have talked about this, and I know he won't be offended if I say that we don't always agree on all of the points that he was making on these things, because I do think that there are reasons for some of the newer technologies as opposed to the older. But what's your take on that in terms of now we've got needs analysis, but then you're really talking about being technology agnostic. You said this, which I think is terrific. How does one choose from all of the things that are out there now, including what Dick was talking about, in making the right decisions for clients? And you're muted, by the way. So how do you make
Thanks
that
for the reminder.
choice?
Yeah, and I don't disagree with anything Dick mentioned. It's challenging, and one of the things that I think, if nothing else, the common theme that all of us on this panel have is, if you're a business user, you're the client, don't try to go it alone. The best advice would be to find a trusted advisor, find that specialist. Don't try to go down that path and reinvent the wheel. Rely on the resources that you can find that line up, that have that experience, because it can be daunting. And stay focused on your core business. Again, my perspective, or RF Connect's perspective, is predominantly on the infrastructure and wireless aspect. But you can get into the weeds real fast. And so we try to stay out of that and focus on the business use cases, because as Dick mentioned, under the GAA aspect, it's 8 megahertz or 80 megahertz of bandwidth. But if you stay inside a building, there's no reason you can't use the full spectrum, which is 150 megahertz. And up until recently, some of the carriers in this country didn't have that to transmit on. So there's, sufficient bandwidth there. But again, to the point, we look at it as a heterogeneous wireless toolkit that we focus on and apply, just again, reinforcing what Dick was saying. The aspects are, is it sensors that you're looking at? Are there sensors in place currently? Do you have Wi-Fi currently in place? What are your plans for the next phases of deployment? Are you looking at robotics? What type of venue is this? And usually by going down that course and finding out what the requirements are on latency, security, capacity, usually we can help guide a customer down the path of what technology is going to help them both now and in the future.
Yeah. So Barbie, we've now talked about needs analysis, and you figure out what they want the outcome to be. Then we talked about, you got a whole series of things in the technology space that you got to figure out for them. And then you got to kind of pull all those things together. So from that standpoint, in your mind, how does the team assemble and then figure out what the different pieces of the technology? Do we go with a Wi-Fi 6 connectivity, or is it sort of a decision-making process that you got to go with a little bit of everything to make sure that the customer gets what they need? How does that pull and tug in your organization go? And in other words, if you bring a project in, who are you going to in the organization to sit down and start to make these decisions? Because they sound like you need real input from a lot of folks to figure that out.
You do need a lot of input. So when you start looking at these really large projects and you see the multiple pieces, whether it's, Greg, who's working in riser and backbone and infrastructure, or Jeff and Dick in wireless technology, it's key to the success of the project to actually find a systems integration company that can help tie all of that together. So it's really not even a need to have anymore. It's a must have. And the reason why I say that is, I think it was Jeff who spoke about smart buildings. Smart buildings are already here, but now on top of that, you're layering in COVID and the need to have health and, healthy, safe buildings. And I think that the key component is the actual integration. So you need to find the player that can hold all of those pieces together and become the glue and become the middleman between all of the separate discussions that are taking place. And that may be one person. It's probably more than likely a group of people who handle that, each one with their own subset of skills, be it, data center or infrastructure or even wireless. And you rely on each person or portion of the business to be responsible for itself. But then you have the key component of tying it together. So those discussions have to happen constantly. They can't be made in a vacuum. The discussions of how point A connects to point B usually isn't just a discussion between those two vendors. It's everything in between that connects those two vendors together. So it's really key from a systems integration perspective. And once you've integrated those systems, to the point made earlier, how do you manage them moving forward? And can you work with an integrator that offers transition services? So once we've implemented, how do we successfully move that into a managed service environment? So there is it's a lot of meetings, Rich. We've been involved with some, somewhat crazy projects where we've had to tie in and integrate everything from, a wave pool to a digital sign to a wireless network. I mean, it's a lot of planning so that it enables you for great execution.
Gotcha. And that makes good sense. So, Greg, everybody's kind of used what you had to say in their discussions of these things. So I think that's encouraging. Now you're looking at the landlord and he's saying, okay, I want you to manage this stuff. And, oh, yeah, Greg, by the way, we have a building management system that's already in place. So make it work with whatever you're doing in the building. Well, maybe those things don't mesh. And you've got to go back and say, yeah, I appreciate the fact you bought this building management system 5 years ago, but I can't make it work with this. So how does that figure into the equation here, where they kind of constantly come to you and you, oh, by the way, I remember now that we have this security thing, or we have this building management system, or we have this IoT that's already been in place. And when we got it, they told us, yeah, don't worry about it. We have APIs, we can connect to anything. So how does that fit into your strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point about the practical nature of sort of integrating all these technologies in commercial office. And I think Barbie hit on it when she talked a little bit about the integration place. But I think I'm going to steal Dick's line. You're spot on when it comes to the challenges, because what oftentimes we find is there are different, the landlord is not a ubiquitous single person. The landlord is a group of folks, and that would typically involves the engineering staff, an IT resource, the leasing folks, the property managers, the asset managers. Everybody in that stack on the development side as well has a say in how things are done. And really where we're finding technology is something that's sort of crossing all of these factors. So when the leasing broker tells the tenant, sure, you can log in, connect to the BMS and change your set points, the engineer is standing in the background pulling his hair out saying, wait a minute, I don't want every tenant to be able to change the set points. That's a nightmare for me. So having these technologies be integrated across a real estate company becomes a big integration challenge. And I think part of it starts with awareness. One, the technology is changing and evolving, and we're going to continue to see this moving, and having partners and integrators and working with industry to help get these solutions installed, implemented, and then get them to talk together really is kind of where our next challenge will come. And I think for most folks, it's really that awareness is where it starts. And you'll see now with more development projects, we're being brought in earlier and earlier to say, wait a minute, we're going to need a network that's going to be able to connect my BMS and my access control and my security cameras and all of these different systems that have common language, which typically is IP, and how are they all going to interoperate? So I think where we're seeing the technology move and where the landlords are going is trying to understand who are their go-to resources from a partnership perspective to help them navigate this decision, and then making sure that all elements of their organization are impacted. And whether that's the asset manager who's signing off on the budget, or it's the engineering staff that is going to have to operate the building, or it's the tenant leasing folks that are going to have to take care of the tenant needs. All of these are important considerations and kind of where we see the industry continuing to move towards.
Right. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the term. It's a fairly new term that a lot of people in wireless hadn't heard yet, called prop tech or property technology, on the theory of fintech. And we have lots of different bits and pieces. So I was at a trade show not too long ago with a friend, fellow Sandy Giaccolo, who is part of the Prop Tech Challenge here. He's the fellow who started the Prop Tech Challenge, which is part of this event. And Sandy and I were standing there, and a young fellow came up and had a touchless entry system that he was promoting. And so Sandy, being the safety and security expert that he is, started talking to the guy. He was the CEO, not the CTO, and said, so what kind of security comes along with this? And how do you provide, are you doing a home run to the cloud? Are you doing this? And the guy kind of had a blank look on his face and wasn't sure, and said, oh, and what network can this run on? And he looked at Sandy and said, Wi-Fi. Well, whose Wi-Fi? And the guy looked at us like, you idiot, Wi-Fi is in the air. It's everywhere. You just put this in and the local Wi-Fi just makes it work. Well, I don't think there was a recognition that there's a security aspect that prop tech companies need to feed into, and how you integrate all of the things that are coming, that people are coming to landlords with now and discussing, saying, here's a great thing that you could use for COVID, or here's something that will work with your system, and just put it in. And now there's a security aspect. So Greg, just to finish with you, how do you view the security aspect of this? And then we'll move around to talk about that, because I think that's a big area that maybe we're not that landlords are not all aware of yet.
Right. And that's, what typically happens is somebody says, oh, yeah, we'll just connect to the network and we're good. Well, there is no network. Or if there is a network, it's a DSL line that's wide open to the internet with a static IP address, where suddenly that system that you've just added has now opened up your BMS to the cyber attack. So I think understanding that cybersecurity is critical. I think most landlords are starting to get their arms around the fact that they need to ask those questions. And really, for the prop tech community, there are lots of great technologies out there, but they all at some point require a network. And whether that network is wired or wireless to an endpoint, it still needs to be a secure network, so that as we connect these buildings to the cloud, we're doing so in a way that is not opening them up to a cyber attack. And that's something that a lot of folks have their arms around now as a real challenge.
Yep. So Dick, you're up with that. How does that security piece fit in with you?
So, first of all, Rich, I wanted to thank you for allowing me to participate in this. It's been very interesting. I think there are two things at issue, and Greg mentioned them, as did Barby. You've got a situation where you have all these various layers of people in a building, and they're all doing different things and having different apps involved. Our approach has been to say, look, we will manage the connectivity in the building for anything that you want to attach. And we'll manage that connectivity, and then you have other people handling the applications, whether it's security, controlled access, environmental, etc., and we'll just handle the connectivity. Then one of the things that we do is we have something called user-safe technology. It's a proprietary platform that effectively prohibits device-to-device communication on our network. So we have the ability to do one of two things. We can set up individual virtual local area networks, which allow device-to-device communications on one of those virtual local area networks, but prohibits any kind of device-to-device communication on other virtual local area networks, thus eliminating the possibility of a cyber attack, a strike, spoofing, hacking, man in the middle, all that other stuff. So that's been our approach. We'll manage the connectivity, and you can bring in whomever you wish to, and we'll work with them to provide the connectivity for their systems.
Gotcha. So Jeff, you're working on this in a little bit of a narrower circumstance, but the security is still a very, very important part of this. And what's your methodology to make sure that when you talk to that building owner, and they're asking questions about the safety and security piece of it, how are you handling that?
Again, as we outlined earlier, a lot of it is bringing it up in meetings, what the metrics are, what they're trying to accomplish, the use cases, business cases, and then you apply, you apply the technology to the use cases, not the other way around. And, Dick highlighted some of the approaches you can take with Wi-Fi to do that, but there's also others. And, again, we view the world towards a ubiquitous wireless approach. But one of the things that's certainly very exciting with CBRS is because it is an LTE technology, you're able to control the security a little bit differently and at more aspects because of issuing SIMs and so forth to control the it's the same technology that the public carriers use. So there's a lot to be said about that. But one of the things I was going to say that is an interesting trend outside the security is we're seeing a lot of the landlords, they have applications and use cases that they want to apply, but they realize that the tenants often come in and want to take control of their technologies and networks themselves. And so they want to make sure that they don't interfere with those applications. So again, some of the leading edge real estate companies are taking the approach like Root and JB Smith, where they actually are deploying CBRS to run their network separate from their tenants so that they don't interfere, and they can apply the business cases to that. So there's not one answer fits all. And again, that goes back to where I think, which again, the common theme here is find expertise, subject matter experts in all the different segments and bring them together, as Barbie mentioned, to help the business user, the business case evolve all that.
Gotcha. So Barbie, in my notes, when we first talked about our prep call, I wrote down right peg, right hole kind of approach for these things. So how does the security fit in with your point? I think Jeff's point is well taken. You've got multiple layers of people here. You got the landlord, you've got their teams, you got the program manager, facility managers, you've got the tenants. How do we look at security to, you got everything from the Target hack where they left a key in a computer that somebody had used 10 years earlier to get into their HVAC systems, all the way up to spoofing and all the stuff that goes with it. How do you assure that you can go in and make a pitch and say, don't worry, we're going to cover the security part of it too for you?
I think that the way that it has to be looked at in the industry is in the forefront of the project now, not necessarily as hindsight. So it used to be a discussion when you'd bring in two separate networks. At some point afterwards, then the topic of security comes up. And I think now in the world that we live in with cybercrime, it has to be thought of up front. So those security policies that Dick was speaking to, they need to be defined from the beginning, from either a landlord or tenant, and what's going to be allowed to happen within that building itself. And then they need to be applied downward, and they need to be adhered to by everyone that's in the building. To Dick's point, we take a look up front and try to segment those networks down to the smallest point. So, A can't always talk to B, but they both may be able to talk to C. But again, security policies and design have to be done at the beginning of the project. It can't be done in the middle or at the end. Everyone needs to plan their deployments around the agreed upon security strategy to make sure that you've put your building, your tenant, your owner in the best possible place from a security perspective.
Yeah, and I agree with you 100%. We're dealing with a company that's been part of our events lately called View Glass. Every window in the building has an API, which means that every single pane of glass is a hackable point. So if you are working on a situation where you're coming in to design and they say to you at the end of the project, oh yeah, we've got all the glass in the building, each one has an API, and they start to do that at the end of the project, you're going to be in hurting city. So I agree with you.
Absolutely.
You've got to look at this from the beginning. So Greg, the implications for you in terms of all that spaghetti that you're now looking at in the riser, there's an aspect of it that you want to get it out of there. You want to cut it and remove it, but you've got to see who's on each piece, because you may be cutting a tenant off and facing a lawsuit if you do the wrong thing. You've got a security implication where someone could just tap into that fiber or that copper and then be into someone's network, because some of these networks were set up without any protections at all. How do you guys do it? Because you can't do it at the beginning of it. You're coming in sort of by nature at the end of it. How do you view that?
Well, I mean, first of all, typically it starts with, just understanding the infrastructure, documenting, databasing, and keeping track of all the infrastructure. And historically, the telecommunications infrastructure has been separate. And a lot of that is either the carriers have extended their service, extended their demarc. So a lot of that does ride on carrier infrastructure. I think the challenge that we face is that the physical space in our buildings is limited. So when you're seeing these brand new buildings being built out, they're not putting in huge riser infrastructures. They're putting in a couple sleeves and basically telling the entire industry, okay, guys, you have 2 4-inch conduits, make it work. So I think what we're seeing is that the physical space is limited in our buildings, and managing that capacity in that physical space has to be part of a program. And what we find in this sort of siloed world of wireless and all of these technologies is the vendor will then hire somebody who will sub out the work, and we could end up with 4 or 5 different vendors all pulling cabling through our same shared spaces. And that's really where a riser management program sort of helps the landlord mitigate that risk, and also typically reduces some costs, because why are we reinventing the wheel if we know and have documented our pathway and know where the sleeves and the cores are? We can do a better job of managing that infrastructure. So it doesn't have to get worse. It can get better. And as the technology evolves, we're seeing, telecommunications providers getting rid of copper. And there are opportunities when tenants move out to remove their infrastructure and free up that riser space so we can reserve it for whatever our next generation may be, whether that's fiber or whether it's the Wi-Fi 6 or CBRS or whatever other technology that's coming down the line. I do know that landlords are not going to be creating or giving up rentable space to create riser space. They're not going to do that. We're going to have to make do with what we have and manage that capacity effectively and securely so that we can leverage the infrastructure to support the business needs of the landlord.
Gotcha. So once around, we have a few minutes left. Best advice that each of you can give to a real estate person looking to find the right vendor for them. What can you give as a last word here for one piece of advice? Dick, we want to start with you.
Why do you want to start with me?
We can finish with you. I'll come around if you want to think a minute. I'll come around again.
That's okay. I go back to my opening statement, which is the first thing that owner developer has to do is understand what his requirements are going into the future. I think that's a critical issue. I think he can bring in the necessary resources, ConvergeOne, Greg, Jeff, Barby. You can bring people in once you know what it is that you want to do. And I think that to me is the most critical point.
Gotcha. Jeff?
Yeah, I would say it's all connected, but you can plan to control your own destiny. Take a proactive strategy. This COVID, I think, has made us aware of that. You never know what is down the road, but you can do a lot of steps to help be prepared. One of the things that, Greg's touched on that we know for sure is, capacity. It's IP centric. The capacity, the hunger for capacity is not going to diminish. So the bandwidth and so forth is going to continue to be needed. Look at a whole toolkit approach to, HetNet, ubiquitous, wireless, or connected, and then find a trusted advisor.
Gotcha. So I'm being called to my next panel, but Barbie, you and Greg have last words.
Great. I would say to bring in your trusted advisor, your systems integrator, early into the discussion. They should be part of your discussions when you're still working with engineering or your architecture firm. Don't wait for it to be an afterthought as how you're going to tie things together to make your building work. If you know that you're going to have an integrated building and systems need to talk, start that conversation early. That's my biggest piece of advice.
Greg, last word.
Yeah, I think the key thing everyone sort of touched on is, have a plan, develop some trusted advisors that you can rely on, and recognize that technology is going to continue to evolve. We're not going to go backwards. We're going to keep moving forward, and wired and wireless and connected systems in our buildings are just going to grow. So make it part of your core competence and bring in those partners that can help you get there.
Gotcha. Thank you all. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Rich.
We'll be jumping on our next panel in a few minutes, but thank you all. It's been great.